Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If the two of you would be so kind, would you mind introducing yourselves?
My name's Brian Courage. I'm primarily the bass player for Abhorrent Expanse.
My name is Erik Fratzke. I'm the guitarist and multi-instrumentalist in Abhorrent Expanse.
Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank
So
you.
I expect this to be a fairly involved answer. So take your times. But what is Abhorrent Expanse? How would you describe the music you guys make together?
Go ahead, Brian.
Um, the silly way that I've come to describe it is it's music where there's something for everyone and everything for no one. There's no real target audience for what we're doing. But we're taking all of our collective experience with free improvisation and using the palette and tool set of the building blocks of extreme metal to kind of take improvised music to a new level of intensity.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, it's really kind of a unexpected intersection or confluence of metal. I won't even say extreme, but yes, just metal in general and improvised music, whatever that would mean for listeners. It could be jazz, it could be very much other things in the music world in general, but also the new music, kind of a new classical um, and composition outlook, and kind of like Brian said, it's a mixture of all three of those interests but with basically a rock band metal instrumentation, more or less, as the starting point.
So I spoke with Brian a little bit about this, uh, but I am very curious about your respective backgrounds, your respective musical backgrounds, in terms of what kind of music you guys grew up with, and what led you to play music, and if you guys studied music. Brian, would you like to catch everyone up?
Sure. Um, my as far as playing music, I started out primarily as a classical player. Started playing violin for 2 years, and being bad at violin is painful for somebody to listen to. So I'm grateful to my parents that they put up with that for long enough until I found my way to the bass. Um, but yeah, started getting really
So
excited about music.
sorry to
Sorry.
interrupt you, Brian, but when you found your way
Yep.
to the bass, was it still in a classical sense? Were you playing
Yep.
like an upright bass?
Yep. Upright bass in orchestra and I joined a chamber orchestra that met before school in middle school in seventh grade that started playing more interesting repertoire. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my freshman year of high school, I got a CD of Apocalyptica, which is Metallica covers played by four cellists. And that just blew my mind and opened me up to a lot of different music. And I had a few friends in high school who I knew were interested in metal. And instead of taking the logical progression of Metallica covers directly to Metallica, skipped over Metallica and asked my friends to just give me whatever the most intense stuff was that they were checking out at that point. Um, so worked through Porcupine Tree and Opeth and a few more progressive leaning bands, and then found my way towards more straight ahead black and death metal towards end of high school, beginning of college.
And I should tell people listening to the audio version that Brian is wearing a very sweet Gorguts shirt. Shout out to doc friend Kevin Hufnagel, who's been on the podcast a few times. Um,
Absolutely.
so, Eric, before we get to your answer, and maybe we can thread the answer into your response as well. Uh, the overlap between classical music and certain types of extreme music like black metal has always interested me. I feel very strongly, having heard a couple of black metal songs that were turned into classical songs, like Emperor did on one of their albums, and maybe hearing stuff like Tchaikovsky, which feels very black, so to speak, in terms of the scales that they use, the minor keys. That there was always a lot of overlap between one and the other, and if you took some classical music and played it on an electric guitar with tremolo picking and added blast beats, you would get black metal. Uh, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like there's merit to that idea?
Yes. It's funny. The thing that I will say, about that in just a minute with my kind of journey as a younger musician, it's very similar to Brian's in that um, I also started in orchestra at age 9, but directly on bass, while simultaneously on my own learning drums. And then by age 10, I was doing guitar as well. So I had all of that going. So I had rock instruments, with guitar and drums, but then I was learning classical on bass. And so um, I had a very similar, I'm a little bit older than Brian. So one of the big turning points, I'd say when I was maybe 13 in the early 80s, was Yngwie Malmsteen. So when you talk about classical, and not necessarily obviously black metal, but because I grew up in a time where there was no black metal yet.
Right. Yeah.
And so oftentimes the first exposure is much more mainstream artists. And yeah, Yngwie was a really big deal because I loved Baroque music when I was starting out and in middle school and early high school, and along comes this guy who is fully formed metal, classical hybrid. Um, and his first album only has a few vocal tunes. It's mainly instrumental. So for me, um, that was a big appeal, was directly seeing a model of someone playing guitar and rock instruments and clearly tapping into classical music on some level.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing. I think a lot of metal musicians have always, Randy Rhoads being maybe a good example, have always tapped into the classical side in terms of um, scales and keys and maybe even some of the composition. Um, but I always felt, as somebody who grew up on metal at a time when it was very uncool, that a lot of the the pushback came from the other side. People who heard this stuff and said, "Well, this is just noise." Um, it, what was it about Ingwe that you heard it and said, "Oh, this is musical merit"? Was it purely
Well,
how well he played, or was it?
yeah, yeah. At first, it was just being flabbergasted at his speed and how much he used it all of the time, and it was just perfect. There was nothing like it. Pre that is Van Halen, which is a very different aesthetic aim, I think,
Yeah,
in a lot of ways. And but also that Yngwie had a very clear aesthetic stance in that it was a very Baroque influence,
right.
along with this just there was no one like him. I mean, I didn't really know about Al Di Meola and a few people like that at that stage. You put it all together, pre-internet, or sometimes you don't. But
Yeah,
yeah, he was just overwhelming. He was a big presence for a lot of us,
yeah,
for a while at least.
yeah, yeah,
He's still the OG, man. That's like one of the guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But besides your classical backgrounds, you guys also come from this jazz improvisational background, which I think is very rare in metal for people to improvise metal. I mean, I know a lot of bands. I speak to a lot of bands who maybe will start jamming, but once it gets to the songwriting phase, the composition phase, it becomes very structured and sometimes very rigid structures of like, you have to have a chorus, you have to have a solo, things like that. For you guys, when you approached Abhorrent Expanse, why was the improvisational side important to you?
Go ahead, Brian.
Um, all four of us have a deep love for metal, but we're all, as far as being players, we are primarily playing in improvised settings in some capacity. Um, so I don't exactly remember. I mean, the idea for this band came from uh, Luke and I essentially being part of a quarantine pod together in the beginning of 2020, um, where he and I were like some of the only people that I would see in person during that time were Luke and his roommate. Um,
Quarantine pod, meaning
and
the bubble of people you could see during the
yeah,
lockdown. Yeah.
yeah, during the first lockdown in 2020. Um, but we had um, various combinations of the four of us had played in this vein previously, where we were improvising together using a heavier palette and just approaching it with that mindset that we were going to try to make something that sounded more like metal while we were improvising. And Luke and Tim and I had done that as far back as when I was living in Minneapolis in 2013. Um, and after I left, when I was coming back to visit Minnesota and play some gigs, I got to play a few times with Erik in different improvised settings, both as a duo, as a quartet with some other instrumentalists. So all the four of us each had, in different combinations, had explored some improvised spaces together. Um, and Luke and I were just talking about the people that we would want to put a project like this together with. And Tim and Erik were the only possible people that we really considered because there was that shared history and we had such deep respect for both of their abilities as players, composers. Just we really admired both Tim and Erik and still do. Um, so it was a very, very clear choice for who we would want to have as a part of this project.
And I have to say, there's always an element of pragmatism uh, with so many bands that just sometimes happenstance kind of shapes things. And we booked a 1 day recording session to
Mm-hmm.
just feel out how the four of us would react and play together. And I think we perhaps came in with a few very preliminary sketch-like ideas, but uh, basically there was no time to write songs. It was kind of set up in a way where we were going to improvise, and there was, even if we had wanted to write songs and bring them in or write together, it couldn't happen that way because we just were getting together for a recording session. And just to see what happened. And frankly, there were no real intents to make it a band, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
After we recorded a few things, it started to become clear to me that we were so much on the same page that there was a group happening right there during the recording session. Like we were really focused in on what we wanted to do without too much real discussion about how to do it and who was going to do what. So it was kind of an amazing thing that just happened because we set a time to do it and we showed up and did it. And then we just had to be aware of what was happening and saying, yeah, this is a thing. Let's explore this.
Now, that recording session that you're referring to, did that end up being Gateways to Resplendence, the first album?
Yes.
Okay. So how much of what ended up happening in terms of um, you know, coming up with the name of Abhorrent Expanse and, releasing the album, did you guys have in mind before you actually stepped in the room together to uh, perform and record?
Um, we certainly didn't have the name worked out at that point. Um, yeah, like Erik said, we didn't really know if it was even going to work. This was almost a proof of concept initially. Um, and it ended up going really well. And we um, we cut a lot of stuff down. We ended up with about 2 hours worth of material from that session that we felt strongly about. And then from there, we found ways to whittle that down and get to the most concentrated and the strongest moments. Um, and that's what became the first album.
Erik, did you want to add anything to that or?
Yeah, kind of like I was saying before, for me personally, I had no preconceived ideas that this was going to be a group. This was more of a way to stay creative during the pandemic
Yep.
with some old friends, but like Brian said, that we all, the four of us, hadn't played together before. And that was just appealing in and of itself. And um, just the fact that I think Brian was prescient enough to have us do it in a recording studio rather than just a rehearsal studio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's booking the studio time, but also booking the time to actually have the engineer and have everybody mic separately and stuff like that. That's a lot of overhead and that's a lot of, it creates an expectation. How confident were you guys that this was going to work out and this would end up being something that you wanted to release?
I I was just, yeah, like Erik said, I was excited to have anything creative to focus on at that point when so many playing opportunities were not active at that time. So to get to go play with a bunch of friends when those opportunities were extremely rare at that point felt very exciting on its own. Um, Also, as far as hiring an engineer goes, like our big part of the reason why this worked as well is
Mm.
because we had an engineer who also is a huge metalhead and a jazz musician. His name is Adam Tucker at Signature Tone Recording in Minneapolis. Another great friend of ours who loves really, really strange music of all kinds. And as soon as I pitched this idea to him, he was extremely excited about it. He said, I will clear my schedule. Just tell me when this is going to happen. So that was a big part of it too, is having an engineer who we could really um, throw a lot of unique ideas at, and none of them would phase him at all. He was just very on board for whatever we were interested in pursuing. So I think for me personally, that helped me not be nervous in that kind of a session was knowing that the engineer who was running things for us was also a trusted friend and also had similar stylistic background to what we were going for.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brian. Yeah, Adam Tucker really was a catalyst for that session. You're right. If it would have had it been at another nice studio with a different engineer, there perhaps might not have been the same energy or focus or kind of a empathy with what we were doing. Because yeah, I mean, Adam would be a fellow traveler to these streams of music for sure. And like I said, this was a rare occasion for me because most of the time, like you say, Adrian, like there's expectations when you book a studio date. Your mind is like, I have to be efficient. We're going to do this. This is going to happen. And for me, this was the opposite of that. And it didn't take long after a couple of playbacks. It was really clear to me that there was a kernel of a group there if we wanted to pursue it. Because everyone was just focused in because we had chosen the right people and we had found each other and just kind of let it happen without too many expectations going in.
So, Brian, you mentioned that the original recording session was about 2 hours, over 2 hours, and I believe Gateways to Resplendence, the release version is around 45 minutes. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of what we ended up hearing and what you guys ended up releasing, how mapped out were your ideas before you got together and started playing together? Did you have a rough idea of how you wanted it to flow, or were you just feeling the room at the time and going with what everyone else was doing?
Just to clarify what I said earlier, the session was a full day of playing, but the result of that was about 2 hours worth of usable material. So it wasn't
Okay,
just
I
that
see.
we
I see.
played for 2 hours.
Okay.
Um, yeah, like Erik said, we came in with some extremely basic conceptual ideas. Um, I think the most involved one was this stopwatch concept for the track that became Frost Suffocation, where every 30 seconds we would switch to a different duo configuration. So we had to do a little bit of just choreography for that about figuring out what the different duos were going to be. We didn't map out what specifically any of us were going to play, but we said, okay, once we get to the 30-second mark, we're going to switch from the guitar and bass to second guitar and drums, or just bass and drums, or just the two guitars. So that probably was the as involved as it got at that point. And beyond that, it was just very general ideas of um, like starting a tune with the two guitars playing, and then bass and drums would interject later on. Um, so there were just all this to say the concepts that we were coming in with were very basic and left room for the music to go to different places. And some of them we tried a couple times and eventually got to something closer to what felt good and what we were looking for. And some of them right away, we just were going for a more general feeling and executed that fairly quickly and then just moved on.
Right. Yeah. I would say any ideas that were brought in were strictly about the form
Yeah.
or structural. There was no actual musical, melodic, harmonic ideas. It was purely structural.
And you guys weren't just switching back and forth between musicians playing, but also individually you guys were switching back and forth between different instruments. Uh, Brian, I think you went between bass and piano. Erik, I think you also went between guitar, bass, organs, and synth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Brian, did you play organ or did that not make the first record?
I played the organ bass pedals with my
Yes.
hand
I see. I see. Okay.
on one song.
So, you guys mentioned choreography. There must have been a little bit of like, okay, at this point we're going to switch, you know, I'm going to switch to the synth or I'm going to switch to the pedals or something like that, right?
Yeah. And like I think when Brian mentioned it, you're kind of jogging my memory. It was we might have tried a few takes of those ideas where we knew we were going to switch up or trade off. And then just the execution got better and tighter by the second or third pass. And then if it, like in a lot of improvised music or any studio situation, if it's not happening by that point, you just abandon it and move on.
Uh, Luke contributes some vocals, um, almost like Mike Patton style, like scatting vocals. Uh, did you guys have an idea of what kind of vocals you wanted to use, or was Luke just kind of in the moment adding vocals?
I believe for the first album, all of the vocals were overdubbed after the fact.
Okay.
I don't think he was doing any of that live in the room.
I mean, I think we just relied on, Luke is very much an outgoing personality. And so he was the person most naturally suited to do vocals, but he also heard them in spots and was very excited to try it out. We were just trying it out. If it didn't work, it'd be very easy to just not use it and keep it instrumental. But his enthusiasm and his vocal ability and willing to just try it and fail is what made that happen.
Now
Or
is he?
succeed. I don't mean they were failures.
Right.
His willingness to be possibly failing was what
Yeah,
made that
risk taking.
risk taking. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Uh, are there actual lyrics that he's singing, or is it just vocalizations?
If there are lyrics, he has not shared them with us, but I'm pretty sure it's just, yeah, it's another textural palette to explore.
Yeah, vocals as sound, as another sound generating instrument. It would have been amazing if he would have improvised lyrics, but I think that's a very common thing, even like proto songwriting, is to just make sounds. But in
Hmm.
this case, it wasn't a placeholder thing. It was like, oh, yes, we don't even want lyrics. It makes much more sense for you to just explore sound.
Brian, you alluded to this when I asked you to uh, describe the music that you guys make together as Abhorrent Expanse, but this is uh this is a concept that it seems to be targeted at a very niche audience. I think extreme metal fans will enjoy the um not just the heavier parts with the blast beats and things like that, and the dissonance and the chaos that you guys sometimes do, but also the way that you guys expand into atmospheric elements, and in a way that and black metal are currently kind of going into this like dissonant, noise inspired, sometimes jazz inspired realm. Um, but when you guys recorded that first session, did you have an audience in mind? Did you think that there might be like a group out there who would appreciate this?
Um, I wouldn't say that I had anyone specifically in mind, but what we've come to realize is that this is just a band that the people who are the most responsive to it are adventurous listeners and people who are willing to take a chance on something, even if the way it's been labeled seems unfamiliar. So um, both the jazz world and the metal world have a tendency to be very conservative in certain circles musically. Um, so that's not our niche. Our niche is the people who are more willing to take a chance on something they haven't heard before. And we're certainly not the only band who's doing this or who's making improvisation the focal point of a project of this vein. Um, but it's relatively unexplored territory. There's a lot fewer bands doing this than there are obviously more traditional metal bands of various styles and subgenres. So as long as people are willing to devote their attention to listening to this music and just come to it with an open mind, then there's a potential for them to find something that they enjoy.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the same time, for me, decades ago, I kind of arrived at a philosophy of I oftentimes want to write music and record and be in groups that would be bands that I want to hear.
Sure.
And I remember before I formed Zebulon Pike in the early 2000s that I was like, oh, I'm listening to what's kind of out there and I'm not hearing a certain thing. And then it just occurred to me, well, maybe I should try to do, rather than trying to find it in someone else's music, maybe I should try my hand at it. And I think for me, that's the philosophy I brought to this group. And I know that just in general, I don't look for an audience, but I know if you're sincere and well, if you're authentic as well, but also if you do it at a high enough level, there'll be some kind of an audience, even if it's not a specific niche. It's just people that respond to something that's functioning at a high level that
And
is unique.
right. And to be clear about the response, the album was very well received, right? You guys got some great reviews from Decibel and other places. It seemed people were very open and uh, into what you guys were doing in terms of, taking extreme metal to this improvised place that very few people had brought before. Did you guys get a chance to tour that first album or tour in general as Abhorrent Expanse?
Yeah, that was the only tour that we've done to this point. Was we played 3 album release shows in 2022 in Minneapolis, Milwaukee, and Chicago. And then immediately after those 3 shows, we went back to Minneapolis and recorded the session, second, the session for the second album.
So the the shows, I'm assuming, were also improvised, right? Like you guys weren't repeating material that you had already recorded.
We we used some of the same structural ideas, like formal constraints, as Erik said,
Right.
um, from that first session. But then because we're improvising, there was still a very different version of those forms. So Adam Tucker, our engineer, was at the Minneapolis release show, and he said he recognized, he's probably the only one there who, quote unquote, recognized the songs that we were playing, because he could tell that we were going for those same structural ideas, even though the notes and rhythms that we were playing were totally different.
Yeah, so you can the structures that we eventually kind of landed on in that first session, you can take them into a live setting so that there's a similarity and there's also a focus through those structures that you can vaguely recognize that, oh yeah, this is very much reminiscent of that tune without it being there's a verse and there's a chorus. It recalls the structural kind of ins and outs and ups and downs and dynamics. And that's what we, like Brian said, that's what we used. So we performed the album, but it was very different than what is actually on the record.
And, to answer the question, who is this for? When you were face to face with your audience, who did it end up being? Was it mostly metal guys? Was it metal guys and girls, I should say? Uh, was it jazz fans? Was it just people that you knew, fellow musicians?
I
Mostly
would,
metal,
yeah,
would you say? But not, but also jazz musicians. Yeah, it kind of reflected it was kindred souls in a lot of ways.
I mean, I have to say that the album cover uh, for the first release, as somebody who grew up on like Morbid Angel and stuff like that, like it very much seems like it's targeted at people like me. You know what I mean? Like
Brian, you
with
should talk about that because I'm trying to, now I'm thinking about that. It was in a way that was probably the trickiest part of the first record was not the musical part, but how do we present this visually as a physical media?
yeah. Um, yeah, every step of the way we were trying to find out how to make the image of the band be metal enough, but also distinct from that, and find some way to make it clear that we were doing something different. Um, so um, I was just looking through all these different album covers by metal bands that I love, and um, yeah, found this artist, David Jorquera, who the piece of his that I was really drawn to was one of the Alterage records, a band from Spain that shares at least one member with Wormed, the
right.
really amazing technical, brutal death metal band. So there's this Alterage cover that was painted by hand, that was really striking to me, and um, yeah, Luke ended up being the one to contact David directly. He's also an incredible tattoo artist and does really extensive, terrifying configurations on people's tattoos. But yeah, Luke got in touch with him. He sent us a few very simple sketches, and um, in response to listening to the music. And yeah, that was one of the coolest parts of the whole process for me, was getting that artwork back and just being completely floored by how incredible that piece looked.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And
So
then
at
so for the latest record, it's almost exploring the exact opposite with the
right.
artwork that was done by David King, incredible composer and drummer and improviser. And we wanted to, I think, with musically on the new record, we're pushing it away, not away, we're expanding from what we did on the first record. And so with the artwork, I think there was a general idea of to try something different
Right. Yeah.
and just see how, it's a little bit of an experiment, how it's moving away from metallic imagery. How will that change perception?
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting.
And the artwork for the new album has more of a like Jackson Pollock uh abstract art
Yeah.
uh feeling to it, which maybe
Dare we say fine art?
fine art, yeah, which maybe is more appropriate to the music that you guys make. Um, and not to disparage the original artwork, but when I say targeted at people like me, obviously I have a lot of black t-shirts with skulls on them. And so when I see an album cover, and most of the most of the album artwork that most of the albums that I bought will have like, you know, death represented in some way. So when I see an album cover with a lot of skulls on it, obviously I'm thinking, well, this will, take this one home and it'll fit it right in with everything else. Which I don't know if is necessarily true of Abhorrent Expanse. I think what you guys are doing is quite unique. Um, but in terms of the artwork, that's the feeling that I get from uh, these two these two albums. So at the time that we're having this conversation, you guys just released the second album, which is called Enter the Misanthropocene through Amalgam Music. It, if I heard you guys correctly, when you recorded the first session, the four of you had not performed in a room together. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
And at the time, or when you recorded the session that ended up becoming this latest album, not only had you done that original session, but you guys had performed live together a few times as well, right?
Yes.
So with that in mind, how would you compare um, recording the second album to the first album? Was it a much more comfortable experience? Did you have expectations of what a Born Expanse would be in terms of music?
Yeah, for myself, I think I came in with more of those type of structural sketches based on the recording of the first record. Um, I think the recording was intense because it was one day right after 3 days on the road. And though the other three guys had to quickly interpret the ideas that I brought in. I think three of us brought in ideas. It was kind of an intensification of the process of the first record with a few more expectations this time. So it was rewarding but intense, and with a little bit more forethought, at least on my part.
Brian, did you want
Yeah.
to add? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Um, we started to explore a few of those ideas during the live shows as well. Like we were mainly working with the structures from the first album, but there were at least one or two things like the piece based on that James Tenney prompt. Um, we were doing that at the live shows and trying to figure out what the shape for that was going to be. Um, that's the piece that became I don't remember exactly what the title is. Subharmonic crystal proliferation in subharmonic space, something like
You
that.
did it. You did it.
I got there. Um, yeah, but that was uh, Tim had brought in um, yeah, this little uh, just written piece of text by James Tenney that was a prompt for how to create an improvised piece, but didn't have any notation or parameters. It just gave us that similar thing, a general sense of structure. And we took that idea into the live shows. We started experimenting, and then we took that into the studio and explored it that way. But overall, yeah, agreeing with Erik 100%, it was definitely a more intense session, and we had some expectations now that we had done this before and we're a little bit more familiar with what we were trying to achieve. Um, I think it also was very focused and resulted in much shorter pieces
Mhm.
because we had specific things that we wanted to try, but instead of meandering around until we got to something that felt strong, it was really a lot of them we were in and out within 2 minutes. We got to execute these ideas and they became very kind of rapid fire improvisations. A few of those, the title track on the album that starts off the album was actually three separate, really short improvisations that we then stitched together with these electronic interludes by Jesse Whitney, and we made them into this 5 minute long suite of short pieces.
And the
So
interesting thing about that is that we didn't go into the studio with that concept in place.
Nope.
There were a lot of specific things we recorded, but I think there was a feeling at the end of the session of we didn't know what we had. It was hard to assess the quality of what we had just done, and so there was a long period I think where we let it sit and didn't listen to it, and we weren't sure what we had, and so after a while we all went back and listened, and some ideas came forward by listening to all these pieces, like what Brian described, where like we put together a suite of shorter things that we thought were just standalone pieces.
it sounds like the editing process for the first album really informed and shaped the improvisation sessions for this one. Is that a fair assessment?
What would you say, Brian? Because I know that you had more of a hand in editing the sessions for the first record.
Yeah. Um,
And this is a very good question.
yeah.
And I just mean that in terms of, when you went into that first session, you really didn't have an idea of what the finished product would be in terms of how you would cut it and release it. And this time you
Right.
did. And it seems like that guided the way you guys approached playing together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think like you said earlier, Brian, there were a lot more shorter, very focused concepts that were recorded for the second record. Whereas I think on the first album, it had those, but it had some very long, expansive things that we explored. And we really didn't do that with the second album. So I think that might be one direct outcome from what you're asking, from the
Mhm.
first session to the second one.
Right. So I have to ask, as somebody who's weirdly into like single song albums, like long extended albums, why why break up the album into different parts? Why not release like a long uh seamless album from beginning to end of the entire session of what you guys recorded? I mean, not the entire like day long session, but the
Mhm.
2 hours plus that you guys originally had.
Um, it wasn't 2 hours plus of continuous playing.
Okay.
Um, there were smaller pieces, like we sometimes it was things related to those specific concepts, or sometimes it was more open ended, but they were chunks of on average between 5 to 10 or 12 minutes. Um, so it wasn't something where we cut all this down from what would have been just an hour long slab. Um, yeah, we were because we had to find ways to continue to make it engaging throughout the day and something where it didn't feel exhausting that, oh, we're just trying to generate something from nothing again without anything to go off of. That's why we brought some of those really basic ideas in the first place, is because we wanted to find ways to uh, keep it engaging throughout the day. So
And
there was no full full length album single track version of this that we cut it down from. It started as smaller chunks.
Okay.
and now thinking about it, Brian, I think all four of us have done plenty of performing where in improvised settings where it's just one long set of improvisation.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of unspoken, but we didn't really want to do that with this project. That just wasn't as interesting. I think subconsciously there was an idea of let's somehow make these closer to song length ideas so that they could kind of be adjacent to mainstream songs, at least in terms of length,
Right. Yeah.
without like expressly stating that. But I just don't think we had an interest in actually performing an hour-long improvisation in the studio.
Yeah.
So, did you guys ever feel the temptation to do another take of any of these shorter segments, or is that heresy in improvisational circles?
No, we did a few multiple takes, only when we only did more takes if we didn't get what we wanted,
Okay.
or we felt it could be more focused or better realized. That's all we were going for. There's a few that were only one take,
Mm-hmm.
no
So,
more than three.
okay. So once again, you guys worked with Adam Tucker at Signature Tone about this. We spoke a little bit about Adam's background and why he was the guy for this. It seems to me that this is an incredibly difficult task for an engineer to capture. Not just the length and the experimental nature of what you guys are doing, but all the different instruments that you guys are cycling in back and forth, and also once you get to the mixing stage, making sure that everything is balanced. Um, can you speak a little bit about Adam's role in terms of uh, the final results and what you wanted this to sound like?
Well, Brian, all I can say is Brian is the type of engineer and musician where if he just hears a little bit of what you're doing, he understands where you're coming from. And I know oftentimes it felt like I was just about to open my mouth to ask him to get a certain sound or do a certain little edit or something, and he was already doing it. I mean, it was uncanny.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
did you?
This is
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
this is a very just another part of what I was saying earlier about how much it helps to have somebody who's on that same wavelength and understands the different stylistic references that you're going for when you're looking for a specific kind of distortion or like as far as instruments, these are just things that he had in the studio at his disposal that we could say, oh, well, it would be really cool to incorporate that electric piano into a few of these pieces. And wow, that door hinge is pretty aggressive. What if we threw a microphone in over here and started working with that? So it was just um, this was at his new studio space. We were one of the last bands to record at his old space and one of the first bands to record at the new space. So we were is familiar and unfamiliar. Um, Same gear, same engineer, new space, but yeah, he enabled so much of our experimentation by being so enthusiastic about being willing to try all kinds of different stuff.
And like any great engineer or co-producer or anything like that, he never says no, we can't, I can't do that. We shouldn't do that. I'm not capable of doing that. That just doesn't come up at all.
Yeah.
And some might argue after hearing the record that maybe he should have stepped in.
This time around, you had a few friends stop by and contribute. Do you want to say who the guest musicians were?
Yeah,
Yeah,
one local St. Paul musician, also an improviser that I play with, Nathan Hansen, the woodwind player. He played clarinet. He played a clarinet coda that I wrote for a piece. Go ahead, Brian.
yep. I mentioned earlier we had Jesse Whitney did those electronic interludes in the first track in between those little short bursts. And then for what became the final track on the album, um, when we recorded, we specifically talked about leaving space for an additional improvised voice. And the person that we had in mind for that was Craig Taborn, who is an incredible piano player who's also he primarily works in the jazz and improvised music world, but also deeply loves metal and extreme music. Actually did some recording with Steve Hurdle from Gorguts.
Nice.
That never ended up being released, but they got to do some playing together. And Craig has been living in New York for a long time, but he's from Minnesota and has collaborated with Erik and his Junk Magic project, has done a bunch of stuff with Dave King as well. So he's one of Minnesota's hometown heroes in the improvised music community. So it's really special to have him be a part of this project as well.
So the album is out. Do you guys have any plans to play live shows?
We're we don't have any live dates scheduled at the moment, but as soon as we can uh, figure a few things out, we're looking forward to getting back to playing in the future.
It's the complicated nature of having two members in one city and two members in another city.
Right. But is playing live something that you guys enjoy? Do you like bringing Abhorrent Expanse out on the road?
I do. It's a challenge. It's a very unique, stimulating challenge. It's unlike anything else that I've been a part of. So I love it.
Yeah.
So this project came out of a pandemic era need for a creative outlet. I'm curious if you guys, uh, what you see is the future for this. you want to keep doing this? Do you want to keep doing these improvised sessions and releasing them every couple of years?
Yes.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, there has been discussions of a possible template, a direction for a third record that is a little unlike the first two. That's all I'll say. So,
Mhm.
yes, if we can muster it, there's ideas already happening.
Very cool. So, Enter the Misanthropocene is out now through Amalgam Music. Brian and Erik, please tell everybody who's listening to this or watching it on YouTube how they can get the album. What's the best way to order it?
Um, the album is exclusively available through Amalgam's Bandcamp page. Um, their website is amalgamusic.org. Just one M, the end of amalgam becomes the beginning of music. So amalgamusic.org, and then abhorrentexpanse.bandcamp.com. Both albums are available on there. Um, we did not end up doing cassettes this time around, so we just have CDs available or digital. The band is on YouTube and Instagram as well. We have a couple of music videos that were created by some more Minnesota-based artists, Jeremy and Max Ilvisaker, also great musicians. Um, but yeah, buy the album on Bandcamp, support independent music.
And is the first album still available on cassette?
Um, we have more cassettes available. It's not for sale through Bandcamp currently, but there are more cassettes for those interested. If you want to contact us through the Bandcamp page, if you're really looking for a tape of the first album, we do have more of those available and can figure out.
Or on Instagram, perhaps, if
Sure.
that suits people better.
Yeah.
The Abhorrent Expanse Instagram page.
And if you're looking for an Abhorrent Expanse t-shirt to add to your collection of black t-shirts with skulls on them, do you guys have that stuff on your Bandcamp page as well?
No shirts at the moment. We do have plans to potentially do some posters of the cover art for the second album, but those are not for sale yet. So there may be more merch in the coming days.
Very cool. So the two of you have been extremely generous with your time, but is there anything else you want to say?
Thank you, Adrian. I thank you for the questions and thank you for checking out the music and having us on your program.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.